Christina Jump, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
So, I wanted to ask you, first of all, how did MLFA become involved in filing this case against Harvard with the US Department of Education? And can you describe the kind of harassment and discrimination these Muslim and Palestinian students are alleging they were subjected to?
Certainly. So, to back up, we are a nonprofit legal organization. So, we take all of our requests for representation that come to us through our intake process on the web. Sometimes it's word of mouth that sends that to us. Sometimes people just fill it out that way. And so, without getting into any particular details, we receive this request the same as we receive all of our requests, and we're able to evaluate it to determine that we saw something here. We saw something worth pursuing.
And can you
What
tell
we
us?
saw,
Yeah, go ahead. Just tell
yes,
us
what
some
we
of the
saw was
details.
that students, and again, there's ultimately more than a dozen students. We spoke to far more, and some of them were afraid to join. I had some concerns and privacy concerns and safety concerns. But of the ones who have joined in this complaint, what we saw is that they have been consistently refused support by Harvard. Harvard has either not acknowledged their claims, not spoken to them or followed up with them, or in some instances specifically dismissed claims that they've tried to make through internal processes on the Harvard campus. And in other situations, told them there's really nothing there. This isn't really anything worth complaining about. And the types of things that they've identified are things that are worth complaining about. We chose this process in particular with the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights because, unlike what these students have endured the last and assert what's been happening to them and to ask for help without having to be scrutinized and in the public spotlight and subject to public ridicule while doing it. I think the most consistent complaint that we received from these students and that we have raised to the Department of Education is that simply being seen on campus wearing a keffiyeh, wearing the traditional Palestinian scarf that's black and white, and which actually you can see in the background here that I have in my office, simply being seen on campus wearing that has led to harassment of many of these students. It has led to them, some of them being chased, being called names, being called terrorists, being told that others don't feel safe simply because of their presence and the fact that they're in the room, being followed to their classes or to their dorms. And in the case of the female students, being afraid to go to their dorms because somebody's following them home. They don't want to lead them right to their doorstep. And being threatened, and in some cases having things thrown at them, or being spat at, or having things poured on. Any kind of protection or prompt response, or even a condemnation that this happened at all. So that's one of the examples that permeates throughout all of the experiences, and is probably the most universal example that's contained in the complaint. There's many others, but that's the one that we saw the most consistently and is the most just outward. These are students walking to class. They're trying to attend their classes, or they're going home after classes, or they are trying to attend their on-campus jobs, or walking through other campus buildings and being harassed simply because they appear to be Palestinian or Palestinian supporters.
So we know that pro-Palestinian students were not only doxxed, but at Harvard and harassed as you describe, but at Harvard and elsewhere, they've actually lost internships, and potential employers and corporate entities have publicly stated, and this is in media interviews, that they would blacklist those people named. Now, is that kind of victimization? Is that legally okay to do that?
Well, I will say a couple of things. First of all, that's not within the scope of the complaint that we raised to the Department of Education, because it's not within the scope of what Harvard, as an educational institution, should be protecting these students from. Harvard has a lot of responsibilities. That one just doesn't happen to be one of them. So we're focusing on what Harvard can control and what Harvard failed to control, and where Harvard failed to act.
Mm-hmm.
Generally speaking, for the most part, private employers have a right to hire whoever they want to hire, not hire whoever they want to hire, as long as they're consistent and as long as they're not taking action based on a protected category, which, you reference news reports, and simply speaking to news reports, I'd say that people need to look at whether there's a protected category at issue here, such as a person's religion, a person's race, a person's national origin, that serves as the impetus for the adverse action that's happening, and whether the employer treats everyone who might make a public statement the same way, or if they single out some and not others.
Okay, so national and even international attention fell on many of these students, not necessarily the ones that came to you, but many of the students at Harvard, after a joint statement was issued by Harvard's, I believe it was the Palestine Solidarity Committee, along with a number of other organizations, and that was on the 7th of October. And basically that statement, which I kind of went back to just recently, which basically it stated that it felt that Israel was solely responsible for the unfolding violence in the region, and that the Hamas attack didn't happen in a vacuum. So that was the offending statement. And after that, there was, just like absolute outcry across the country, politicians, everyone, the media. In your opinion, did that statement amount to anti-Semitic hate speech? And was that an expression of support for Hamas, which of course we all know has been designated a terrorist organization by the U.S. government?
I will say that we are not representing any particular student group with this action with the Department of Education complaint that we filed. We are representing individual students here. And those individual students certainly have as much right as any other student, as any Jewish student, as any Christian student, as any student, to voice their opinions if they see fit, and to still be safe on campus and safe in the environment where they live and attending classes. But the statement that you referenced that occurred on October 7th, again, is not something that is what we are representing here. It's not something that is part of the Department of Education complaint. I think there's plenty that has happened on Harvard's campus since October 7th. And I believe that with everything that has happened there, we focus on the specific acts regarding the specific students that we represent. There's more than enough there to justify the complaint that we filed, and the Department of Education agrees that there's more than enough there to warrant opening an investigation, which is what it has done.
Okay. But we also know that the Education Department's Office for Civil Rights has opened 2 separate investigations, one into Harvard's former president, Claudine Gay, and one into the institution. Is this an indication that it was the Education Department was protecting the interests of one set of students over another?
I would certainly hope that it's not. I haven't seen anything thus far to indicate that the Department of Education is anything less than sincere in its investigation efforts. We filed a complaint, and the Department of Education very promptly opened its investigation within, I believe, a week of when we initially filed that complaint on behalf of the students that we represent. And with that investigation being opened, we look forward to working with the Office of Civil Rights as it pursues its investigation and moves forward through it in order to, again, do what Harvard did not, and hear out these complaints by these students, actually investigate them, point out that there's corroborating evidence and look into it and find that it is justified, and look for some long-term solutions other than just talking points that will help these students and others in the future.
Mm-hmm. And to your knowledge, Harvard still has not opened any internal inquiry or anything, any investigation into the allegations made by these students to date?
As I mentioned, there were some prior communications with Harvard administrators and with Harvard employees and officials that these students attempted on their own. None of those led to, much of it did not lead to any investigation. And some of it led to just complaints being dismissed very promptly and quickly without explanation. And none of it led to any changes, any real investigation, and any concrete action on the part of Harvard, which is what we are hoping the Office of Civil Rights and Department of Education will now be able to do, as Harvard did not.
Of course, there's a wider issue here, Christina, which is that freedom of speech is being attacked across campuses, not just Harvard, but we've seen that it's primarily pro-Palestinian groups that are being targeted. Institutions like Columbia and Brandeis have actually banned groups like the Palestine Solidarity Committee. Is it legally defensible to argue that criticizing the state of Israel, which is clearly what many feel these students are actually doing, is that the equivalent of hate speech or anti-Semitic speech, or should it be argued that it is?
In response to that, I'll say that these students, and all students of any religion, have the right to their own free speech. They have the right to voice their opinions. And that free speech right may come into play with some of the allegations that we have, but not all. Certainly that doesn't come into play with just walking to your classes or walking home. Nonetheless, they do have the right, certainly, to do that. They have the right to express their own concerns. They have the right to challenge any political point of view, whether it be of a U.S. politician, of an Israeli politician, of any politician. They absolutely have the right to do that, as do all Americans. And all students, both on Harvard campus, on other campuses, and throughout the United States, as well as all United States citizens, have the right to that speech as being protected. Simply criticizing a particular political viewpoint is not hate speech. That's vastly different than hate speech. A complaint that was filed on behalf of Jewish students at Harvard, which I believe stopped when a separate lawsuit was filed, because the Department of Education does not tend to do a redundant investigation if there's another path that's open as well. But the fact that Jewish students also filed a complaint, I think, reinforces the issues that we are raising here, that Harvard simply failed to protect its minority students. It failed to take action. It failed to widely condemn any hate speech, any inappropriate actions, any targeting of students on its campus and within its buildings and classes, where they are there to learn, and their learning process has been impeded and disrupted, if not in some instances completely stalled.
Thank you so much, Christina, and thank you for the work that you're doing on this issue. Thanks a lot for joining us today.
Appreciate it. Thank you.